Tonight on The Story.
I think this tax is not right.
New payroll tax in Salem, as many who work there fed up.
Your proposal to pass this ordinance without sending it to the voters is quite frankly cowardly and shameful.
But the city's mayor says it's critical to provide much needed funding for first responders.
We've been cutting and cutting, and we can't cut anymore.
Plus, Governor Kotek signs a bill into law that will cap rent hikes on many properties. But one viewer wants to know, does it apply to rent renewal offers made before she signed the bill? How about just one day before? We have the answers. And finally, 1,000 feet below the surface of the ocean sits the recently rediscovered SS Pacific, the end result of one of the worst maritime disasters along the West Coast.
She's wet.
But now crews are working to send robots down to retrieve artifacts, and you guessed it, treasure.
And so when they ended up in the water, they had to decide, am I going to sink to the bottom or am I going to let go of my gold?
Here's The Story.
I'm Pat Doris. That's a tough question. Welcome to The Story. Welcome to Friday. It would be so nice just to relax and have fun with the show tonight. Sorry, we're going to start with something that might make you tense up just a little bit. We're starting with taxes. Did you hear the city of Salem voted to impose a payroll tax? Now you might think, okay, whatever, that only affects people who live there. By the way, we care about you people in the greater Salem area, so that would still be a big deal. But, oh no. No. This is much bigger than that. About 70,000 of you are going to be in for a rude surprise because you work at least one day in Salem. And that is our big story tonight. The city of Salem passed that payroll tax this past Monday. It impacts, as I mentioned, at least 70,000 people who live elsewhere but then travel to Salem for work. I'm thinking that's probably mostly government workers, but surely there's a bunch of others. Can a city really tax someone who doesn't even live there? Well, apparently the answer is yes, at least for now. The tax passed by a vote of 5-4 at City Council. But this is sure to become a battle royale, and so we're going to take a bit of time to bring you up to speed on the whole thing. First, the details. The city would tax anyone who works within the city limits and makes more than minimum wage. It includes people who work for someone else or themselves, works in an office or from home, doesn't matter, it's all going to be taxed. The tax would be 0.814%, so less than 1%, and would raise an estimated $28 million a year. Someone making roughly $62,000 a year would pay about $500 if you worked 5 days a week in Salem. But even if you work a few days in Salem, it appears you could be taxed for each day that you work there. A city spokesperson said those fine details like that are going to be worked out later as specific rules are ironed out. But come on, if the law says that you will be taxed for working in Salem, it would seem that even one day would count. And what if, for example, you're a state lawmaker or maybe a lobbyist in Salem for the legislative session? Well, you would likely be taxed for the time that you're there. All right, so let's get into why the city thinks this is so important. The mayor, Chris Hoy, says the city is facing a $19 million shortfall for city services.
The thing is, we've been cutting for decades. We've been cutting and cutting, and we can't cut anymore. We're essentially, if we didn't do this, we'd have to close our library, stop park services, close our senior center, and then we'd still have to cut money from the police and fire budget.
Well, he said decades, and it might feel like decades, but according to the city's website, Salem reduced staff back in 2008, so, 15 years ago, and has not increased staffing levels since then. At the same time, they say the city has grown by 26,000 people. And the mayor points out some of its property is not taxable, which hurts the city.
But as the state capital, we have over $2 billion worth of real market value property in our city owned by the state of Oregon. They don't pay us a dime in property taxes. It's a huge hit to our general fund every year, and we just really didn't have a choice. Measure 5 and Measure 50 back in the 90s really hampered local governments, and that's cities, counties, and school districts. It really hampered our ability to keep pace with the growing need of our community.
I have to say, I hadn't thought about that state land within the city limits of Salem. Interesting point. By the way, Measure 5 passed back in 1990, Measure 50 passed in 97. Both were part of a big pushback against the fast rise of property taxes at the time, and they limited how much property tax money could go to government and schools. So that's why the mayor says the payroll tax is now needed. And with this new tax, the mayor says money will flow to some different areas. They'll go to 3 existing micro shelters for homeless people and a navigation center for the homeless, as well as a police outreach team for the homeless. It would also pay for the current police force and the current fire department. So that's the backdrop against which the Salem City Council held a public meeting Monday night to hear from the public and then vote. As you might expect, most members of the public who showed up were not pleased.
It feels to me everyone has had a hard couple of years. My personal purchasing power has declined about 14% over that time. I already pay about 20% of my income in federal income taxes. I pay about 10% of my income in state income taxes, and my property taxes amount to about 2.5% of my income. This would put it at about 33%. Almost a third of what I earn would go to taxes. This would affect me and my family. I'm a single father of 2.
I wouldn't otherwise be here except that taking my hard-earned money doesn't sit well with me. My grocery bill, my utilities, my gas for my car, those expenses and more are all going up. Even as I cut back and make hard choices on what I want to spend my money on, my dollar is buying less and less, and you want to take more of it? No.
Business owners and leaders also showed up, angry over many different parts of the tax.
My husband and I own a small roofing and garage door business here in Salem. We have a total of about 22 employees, 20 of which work up and down the I-5 corridor every day. As a small business, we are not adequately equipped to handle the administrative burden associated with tracking and implementing the proposed employee tax in Salem. The complexity and logistical changes posed by this tax would place an undue burden on our small business and divert valuable time and resources away from our core business operations.
I agree with many of the other comments here that it really should be put to the voters of Salem. As a business owner looking for new employees, hiring currently, looking for skilled workers, I don't know how this type of tax on their payroll won't discourage them from working in Salem.
I believe the city might raise their hand and ask for help from those of us who run businesses and look at calculators, profit and loss balance sheets all day long on where we could help you. There are several of us that are willing to, just as you do, volunteer our time to help this great city, okay? There are so many different avenues, I believe, to save funds.
Now, I know we're letting these comments run longer than they do on a typical news show. We're doing that for 2 reasons. First, I want you to hear the many reasons that people are against this. They're thoughtful and heartfelt. Second, I've attended many city council meetings just like this, and I'm always impressed by the effort that people make to voice their opinions on things that affect them. Remember this when you hear that democracy's not working or people have given up on government. If that were the case, these folks would not be there. Yes, there is a clash of ideas going on, but the people are using the system to work it out. Speaking of which, one of the people who testified against the tax scolded city leaders for delay in dealing with the problems and then racing to push the tax through.
Our members are very concerned, frankly, about the impacts of the proposed payroll tax on their businesses and their employees, and we urge you to place this before the voters. We're certainly aware, the arguments that have been made that we lack the time to take this to the voters before the next budget cycle, but frankly, we don't believe this is being entirely fair with the voters. Salem has been eating into your ending fund balance reserves for years now. And I think we all know that. In fact, I sat on your Sustainable Services Task Force 5 years ago, back in 2018, and we talked about that in depth there. And as we talked about then, we're exactly in the situation that we predicted, and that was running out of money and having to do something. But frankly, the city's kicked the can down the road for a number of years, and now we find ourselves in a position of having to act rapidly. And so we just don't think it's fair to say there's not time to take that to the voters, because we're in a situation that was predicted years ago.
So about that last part, nearly everyone who spoke against the tax said some version of, let the voters decide. The city council listened and essentially said, no. Why? Well, the mayor told us yesterday there was no time for that. But the folks I talked with behind the scenes, they think there's something else. They think the real reason is that city leaders know a vote would reject the tax. There's also the interesting question of taxation without representation. Can you really tax someone who does not get to vote on whether they accept the tax? I mean, I guess so. Everyone who books a hotel room pays some sort of an extra tax, and really, when you think about it, nobody in Washington state really cares whether you're okay forking over the sales tax. And what about the idea of being taxed for working just a couple of days in Salem? Well, check this out. The blog Huddle Up on Substack pointed out that Stephen Curry, who lives and plays in California, gets taxed in most states where he plays, as do most NBA players, and he was taxed in Oregon. In 2018, he paid $90,000 to Oregon in taxes for the money he made while he was playing against the Blazers here. So there's that. And the folks who work days in Multnomah County, by the way, and make enough money, well, they pay the preschool for all tax, again, no matter where they live. There is, by the way, a way for citizens to challenge that Salem payroll tax, citizens from Salem. And late this afternoon, the city confirmed that one person has filed a petition to start gathering signatures to force a vote on the new tax. In the meantime, it is set to start next summer, and that question of voters approving it, well, the city says yes. Oh my gosh, yes. We would love to have a vote, but we're going to have to do it on our timeline, which, by the way, is in 2031. I kid you not. 7 years after they start collecting the tax, the city thinks it'd be a great idea to have a vote. I'm sure this is not the last we've heard of this one. So, what are your thoughts on this? Send us your comments, will you? We'd love to hear what you have to say. The email is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you. Let's go now to a question that we got from a viewer named Patrick. He wrote asking about the new rent control law, Senate Bill 611, that Governor Tina Kotek signed into law earlier this month. Here's what he says happened to him the day before she signed it. He says, I received a new lease offer by email with an increase of 14.54% rather than the newly signed limit of 10%. This is 5 months before my current lease expires. It looks like they're trying to work around the new rate limit. Patrick wants to know if the offer is legit and valid since his lease will expire after the new law is signed. Unfortunately for Patrick, it does kind of look like his landlord is probably trying to work around the new rate limit and might be able to do it. Based on some of the legal analysis we've received when asking experts, the landlord offer does stand. The law only applies to lease renewal offers that come after the law was signed and for rentals that are more than 15 years old. Let's back up and take a look at the law. This is considered an emergency update to Oregon's rent control law that passed back in 2019. That 2019 law prevented landlords from raising the rent more than 7% a year plus inflation. Well, you probably know that last year inflation went kind of crazy. That meant the rent hike cap was 14.6% for 2023. That was a bit hard to swallow for a lot of renters who thought the law would give them some relief from big rent jumps. Here are two of them testifying to lawmakers in favor of this new bill back in March.
I live with the constant stress of knowing that if my landlord raises my rent by the allowable 14.6%, I will be priced out of my home. My fixed income is just above the threshold to qualify for any assistance, but not enough income to pay that kind of rent increase.
Several of us are not going to go see our grandkids this year because we can't afford the travel or turned our thermostats down. I have a 94-year-old woman that's wearing a coat every day.
Now, under the new law, landlords cannot raise your rent by more than 10% or the 2019 rule of 7% plus inflation, whichever is lower, if your unit is at least 15 years old. It's an emergency ordinance, so it went into effect immediately after the governor signed it. So now the cap is 10% for the rest of the year, and a new rent cap will be calculated for next year based on updated inflation numbers. Those numbers are falling, by the way. June's annual inflation rate was 3%. But again, the law only applies to lease renewal offers that came in after the bill was signed, which was July 6th. So it has to be after that. If your landlord, like Patrick's, told you your rent was going to go up on July 5th, even if the increase doesn't actually happen for months, sorry, seems like you're stuck with that. Your best bet is to try to negotiate with your landlord to get the lower increase. Sorry, Patrick. It doesn't look good, but it looks like that is what is going to have to happen. Up next on The Story, a piece of Pacific Northwest history that rests at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean has finally been located, now nearly 150 years after it sank. Crews are working on sending robots to the wreck, hoping to find the gold that likely went down with the ship. Details when The Story returns. It's one of the deadliest maritime disasters on the West Coast. At least 325 people died when two ships collided in the winter of 1875. One of those ships, a steamship named Pacific, was finally found at the bottom of the ocean back in December in Puget Sound. And a crew from Seattle is getting ready for a series of dives to recover pieces of history, and they hope some treasure as well. Greg Copeland from our sister station King 5 has the story.
The thing about embarking on a new adventure is you never quite know what to expect.
She's wet.
With the wreck of the Pacific located more than 1,000 feet down, now comes the real challenge.
Our next step is totally different because now we have to worry about detecting metal and we have to worry about like recovering these different sized objects. You can see the camera right here.
Sarah Haberstock leads the team running the ROVs. Those are remotely operated vehicles. They're currently building 3 bigger ones to handle the harsh ocean conditions and the heavy lifting.
So you have to have a robot that can do, you know, instead of just 3 functions, it has to be able to do like 20 functions.
Well, I'm 7 meters off the bottom. I'm still going down.
They're fighting through a couple of issues: current and boat swing, because they're anchored, making it difficult to navigate.
We're gonna have to redeploy.
Plans for a new guidance system and larger ROVs should fix that problem before they head out on the ocean later this summer to begin the search for treasure. Rockfish CEO Jeff Hummel and his team have done extensive research on the SS Pacific's West Coast runs between San Francisco and Victoria, BC. He believes there were a lot more people on board that night than the official estimate, many of them prospectors.
There was probably 50 to 100 people who actually had gold on their person in substantial quantities. And so when they ended up in the water, they had to decide, am I going to sink to the bottom or am I going to let go of my gold? And I think the obvious conclusion is they would let go of their gold. So what we've done here is we've made up what are called pokes of gold, and it kind of looks like a tube sock. This is what a miner would have. This would have been a little higher than average wage. Average wage per miner was about $1,500. So this here is $1,875, is $2,100. And in today's dollars, that's $234,000.
An article in the Daily British Colonist newspaper dated November 9th, 1875, shows the bank's haul estimated at nearly $79,000, with the miners carrying another $100,000 in gold. It would be worth at least $17 million today. The lead and tungsten in these pokes or pouches are non-ferrous like gold, so if the metal detector on the ROV can detect these on the bottom, it can detect gold at the Pacific wreck.
1, 2, 3.
But gold is only half the prize.
We expect to find items made of wool, items made of cotton, items made of leather, personal photographs, all sorts of stuff. It's our responsibility to, preserve those and, put them on display so people can enjoy this incredible time capsule to a very specific moment of our Northwest history. Is it backwards?
No, that's right. Wait, what the heck?
No, it's backwards.
It is backwards.
Yeah, okay.
First, a few bugs to work out.
So you're headed, I think, away from the boat.
Okay.
If they can't find a poke of lead in less than 100 feet of water, how will they find gold more than 1,000 feet down, buried in mud?
Tough question. Good engineering. The team is confident they can solve that problem, though, so we'll certainly keep you posted if or when they're able to bring anything from the Pacific back up to the surface. Coming up next on the story, from the bottom of the sea to Johnston Ridge Observatory up on Mount St. Helens. It's been 2 months since a landslide took out the only road to the observatory, stranding lots of cars. Some thought it would be a year before they'd be able to recover their wheels, but crews got creative to make that happen today. Cale Williams shows us how when the story returns.
Next at 6:30, speaking out against sexual harassment, the allegations made by custodians at Portland Public Schools. Plus, rushing to the rescue, the race to save a pair of workers trapped in a manhole. And the heat is on when we'll peak and then taper off to tolerable. Your full 7 days coming up at 6:30. Hope to see you then.
Now to a story that really just feels like something that could only happen in the Pacific Northwest. 2 months ago, a landslide took out the only road up to the Johnston Ridge Observatory near Mount St. Helens, stranding several people and their vehicles. At the time, folks who were there and trapped were rescued by helicopter, but it was just the people. Their cars were stuck, and they had no idea when they'd be able to get them back. Until today, that is. Cale Williams shows us the temporary road that was built to get everything down.
It's been exactly 2 months since a landslide took out State Route 504 on Mount St. Helens behind me. That landslide left more than half a dozen cars stranded at the Johnston Ridge Observatory. But today, with a temporary fix in place, those drivers got their cars back, and they were excited.
I'm pretty stoked right now. I'm a little worried. I'm pretty sure the car's going to be good. I got a brand new battery in it, so I'm a little worried that it's not going to start, but we'll see how it goes.
Daniel Goins was just planning to hike near the Johnston Ridge Observatory for about an hour on May 14th. But after the landslide left his and 6 other vehicles with no way out, he's just happy it didn't take longer.
I was worried that it was going to be maybe about a year out, maybe 2 years out, but definitely a surprise when WashDOT called me.
Led in a caravan by transportation officials, Goins and the other drivers were finally reunited with their vehicles.
Got my car started right up. Seemed like there was no problem at all. Everyone had their cars going, and it was pretty quick, easy trip.
Robert Cornejo Garcia was the first one down the road and came upon the landslide as it was happening.
I hit it, the corner, I was coming out 40. Yeah. And so you lose control of your front wheels a little bit. And I came within 5-10 yards. It's trees snapping like pencils. It sounds like cars crashing over and over again.
He quickly turned around and warned the others coming down the road. The stranded drivers spent the night on the ridge before being flown out by helicopter the next day. And despite it all, Cornejo Garcia says the whole ordeal, it was still a best-case scenario.
I was thinking if I leave a little earlier, maybe it hits me. If I come a little later and it's dark, I don't see it. And the next day, there's supposed to be kids coming up for field trips. So at the end of the day, a car's a car.
Now this fix is only temporary, and it'll be some time before the public is allowed back in the area. It'll be even longer than that. Could be 3 to 5 years until a permanent fix is in place. Cale Williams, KGW News.
Let's hope it's soon. That's a gorgeous place up there. Thanks, Cale. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. And remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. In the meantime, stick around for the news at 6:30. Enjoy your weekend. I'm competing in a triathlon tomorrow, then taking a couple of days off next week. But the team has great stuff in store for you. I hope you'll join them right back here on Monday.